والصلاة والسلام على سيد المرسلين وعلى آله وصحابته أجمعين. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. سبحانك لا فهم لنا إلا ما فهمتنا إنك أنت الجواد الكريم وقرب زدني علما. So we had started the discourse on riya, ostentatiousness, and in our last sitting we talked about the fact that riya, it is of two types basically. One is showing for the sake of something from a religious standpoint perspective, riya fi din, which is quite serious, and then another is riya for dunya, which most of the people are engaged in that. And there's various ways, manifestations of that. 5 of them were mentioned: with one's body, with one's clothing, with one's speech, with one's actions, and with whom one associates with, his companions, his za'irin, etc. And we mentioned some details regarding that. Now the question is riya always haram or not? Doing things for show, is that totally out of the question or what? So here, this is a very important aspect of this particular issue. So the answer to that is there's a sort of there's details. It's not a simple one size fits all. So there's basically 2 types of, as we mentioned earlier, religious, showing for ostentatiousness regarding deen, showing that I'm pious or something of that nature. And then there's another just showing off, worldly showing off, which is what we see most of the time all around us, all over the world. So, showing ostentatiousness in ibadat, this is absolutely haram. I mean, worshipping, showing acts of worship to other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is obviously it's not in the equation, because the objective of worship is, of course, only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So if anything else or anyone else or any other objective is mixed with that, that's not going to work. So that is totally out of the question, totally haram. So what about other than ibadat? What about other than worship? Like wealth, like notoriety or fame, name. So the acquisition of money and wealth obviously is not haram, and obviously, in fact, with a good intention, the acquisition of wealth and its seeking wealth, as it's mentioned in hadith, that the talab al-halal jihad, it's a type of jihad, particularly in the day and age that we live in. There's so many avenues of haram open, and the avenues of halal are not that many, and they're more difficult. So there's a struggle, and if the intention is to earn halal livelihood and to support one's family, then this is itself an act of worship. So there's nothing wrong with that. Now suppose seeking more money, seeking more fame, just for the sake of that. This is also not haram per se. We can't say that is definitely forbidden, but obviously, what is the consequence going to be? What is that going to take us? If we make our objective, I want more money for the sake of more money. I want more fame for the sake of fame. People should know me. People should respect me. So obviously, this is taking us in the opposite direction from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. An interesting concept in business is that they teach you that we need to seek growth in our business, 10% a year, 20% a year, just simply in our wealth and in our fame and name, etc. So the question comes up is, so is growth in and of itself something that we should be, make as a major objective? Suppose I tell you that every year your head is going to grow 10%. How would you like that? Would you like that? Your head's going to get bigger, 10% every year. You can imagine after 50 years how big your head is going to be. Well, actually, nobody would like to have that. That would be a musibah. So similarly, the wealth or the fame or that is not utilized in a proper channel, that is not going to, take us towards our objective of reaching to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, getting closer to Him, it's going to be a burden. And therefore Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam says that the wealth, that one has, it will be a burden for him, except what he has actually used, in the proper way, in such ways which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pleased. So, but in any case, someone is engaged in increasing his wealth, increasing his name and fame, more Facebook likes and more thumbs ups and all this kind of thing. So we wouldn't say this is in and of itself totally haram, but obviously it's not something praiseworthy, that's for sure. And what would be the outcome of such mindsets and such endeavors? I think that's self-evident. So, as we mentioned, to have a proper objective towards increasing one's wealth, if there is some reasonable objective and acceptable objective for that. Somebody wants to be more helpful in the community, he wants to spend more in charitable ways, etc. That's fine. Similarly, fame or name or acceptability and being known in the people, we have the example of Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam. Very interestingly, he himself presented himself that I should be placed upon the national treasuries because I am very capable of understanding the way in which it should be spent and looking after it, with integrity and honesty. And seeing that he was, obviously he's a prophet of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and so he saw in himself that he was the most capable of doing so. So there's nothing wrong with that. And obviously that's the action of a prophet, and the actions of prophets are our example. We have that example also in Qadi Abu Yusuf, one of the very important students of Abu Hanifa. In fact, the Hanafi madhab is largely made up of the opinions of Abu Hanifa and his companions, and largely, particularly in legislature, the opinions of Abu Yusuf. Now, Abu Hanifa himself refused to become the Qadi. The Khalifa, in fact, he ordered him to become the Chief Justice, and he flatly refused. And he was jailed, and he died in jail under duress and torture for not accepting this position that everyone is hankering for. Now, his prized student, Abu Yusuf, he accepted that position. Well, because there was a different Khalifa, it was a different set of circumstances. So Abu Hanifa realized that he was going to be used for political expediency, and Abu Yusuf realized that I can actually function here within the capacity with independence and without duress, and not being simply here as a political pawn. So that's fine. And in fact, the ulama mentioned, in that scenario, when you know that you're the only person that can fill that position, particularly a social position where there's trust involved, where there's rights involved, and you're the only one that can really do that properly, you have not the right to refuse. You must take up that position because it's a responsibility towards the society. So there's nothing wrong with that. That's fine. And being famous and having name and fame, one thing is that we hanker for it. We want to have people knowing us and liking us and cheering us on. So that's obviously the opposite direction of focusing ourselves on our Creator and preparing ourselves to return to Him. I mean, what are the people going to do for us in the final analysis? They haven't got with them the ability to help us in iota or hurt us in iota. So why would we be wanting to do that in the first place? Nevertheless, again, we can't say that's totally haram, but obviously it's taking us in the opposite direction we would want to be going. And just merely the fact that somebody becomes extremely famous, is that also bad? We're going to see in the seerah of Uwais Qarni, rahimahullah ta'ala, he was mentioned by name by Rasul alayhi salatu wasalam. He was alive during the time of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. Because of the khidmat of his mother, he could not come to Medina and meet the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But Rasul alayhi salatu wasalam said that there's a fellow by the name of Uwais from Qarn, and he mentions, and he has not come because he's in the khidmat of his mother. He's serving his mother. And if any of you happens to meet him, tell him to pray for your forgiveness. So actually during the time of Umar, he actually came to Medina. And so Umar heard that people have come from Medina, from Yemen, and so he asked about him, and he found that actually he's there. So he mentioned that hadith, and he said, please pray for me, please pray for my forgiveness. So Umar is asking him for forgiveness. So the interesting thing about Uwais Qarni, rahimahullah ta'ala, was that from there, then he went to Kufa. He said, I want to go to Kufa. Where do you want to go? I said, I want to go to Kufa. He said, okay, I'll write to my people there, and and they will, look after you. He said, no, don't, please. I want to be with the common people. I don't want to be known. So in fact, when he got there, he just kind of silently blended into society, but then it came to be known, and people started coming to him, make a istighfar for me, and then he said, oh, I'm getting too much famous here. And he took off, and nobody knows where he ended up after that. So we have in our pious ancestors, and obviously he was the greatest of the tabi'een, but he was always fleeing from fame and name and being well known and all that. So that's one sort of perspective. However, we have the example of our Prophet. So no one is more famous in the world than Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Right, and he never, ran away from that fame of that. But he also didn't ask for it. So if we're not asking to become famous, or we're not asking to become known, but it just comes from Allah Subhanahu wa Taala, and what is not in hum and gham, is not really occupied in seeking it. At the same time, he doesn't feel a loss if he loses it. He becomes famous, so it's from Allah. He loses fame and everybody goes against him, from Allah. It really doesn't really matter, right? So then there's no issue there. The issue is when you make it your objective. I should, be known. I should be appreciated. I should be liked. I should be cheered on. This is what it is, Okay. There's another issue, and that's probably all of us face that, and that is that people like to have a good appearance. And why do you want to have a good appearance, by the way? To show yourself? Not really. Nobody's really trying to show themselves that they're beautiful or they're otherwise, but obviously they're trying to show others. It might be a spouse, it might be others, it might be their friends, it might be their acquaintances. So how is that? Again, in and of itself, it's not haram, but of course, if that becomes somebody's preoccupation, the beauty industry, billion-dollar industry, it all feeds off of that sort of lust for, impressing people or trying to look good. But of course, everybody would like to look presentable to others. There's nothing wrong with that. I mentioned last time the Prophet ﷺ himself would prepare himself to meet delegations and people that he would meet. And Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha, seeing him combing his hair and making himself more presentable. She questioned that. Well, what's that? So Nabi Sallallahu said that people would like to look presentable for their companions and for the people that they meet. This is natural. There's nothing wrong with that. It will become unnatural when it becomes a preoccupation. And everything in moderation has its place, but that, of course, is something that we would want to keep a check on. What extent are we really, concerned and conscious of that? There's a hadith of Muslim, rahimahullah ta'ala, hadith of Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, very famous hadith. And Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam says that nobody will enter into the paradise if they have even the mustard seed worth or amount of arrogance, kibr. لا يدخل الجنة من كان في قلبه مثقال ذرة من كبر. So that's pretty scary, right? Very scary, in fact. Small amount of arrogance or thinking one to be superior or I'm something. Very dangerous. So somebody said that, so you can see how the Sahaba, they were always, reflecting and they were thinking very deeply on whatever Prophet was saying. They said, so somebody said, Ya Rasulullah, one of us would like to have his clothing nice and he would like to have his shoes also nice. So is that part of arrogance and kibr? So Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said, Inna Allah Jamilun yuhibbul jamal. He said, Allah is Jamil, is the most beautiful, and He loves beautiful things. So nothing wrong with that. But what is kibr? Kibr is Batr al-haq wa ghamt al-nas. Batr al-haq means the truth, we push it aside. Our objectives and our desires and our wants and wishes would take priority to truth. So if we were to be corrected or something like that, then we wouldn't pay cognizance to that. So we would rejection of truth basically, and ghamt al-nas means looking down upon the people. They're all below me. I'm something above. We don't know. We mentioned earlier many times perhaps that our pious ancestors would always consider themselves, basically nothing of any significance, unknowing what their ultimate, destination would be and position would be with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we never see ourselves being better than anyone, even the non-believers, because we don't know who's going to die in what state. Okay, today I'm sitting here giving the dars. What's going to happen to me tomorrow? I have no clue. A fellow who is fasiq and fajr and doing every type of filthy thing out on the street, who knows, he might get hidayat and he might become the wali of Allah. So therefore we never know what is. So we never look at ourselves as being superior to anyone. Allahu Akbar. And in fact, there's another hadith which mentions that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves to see the manifestation of His ni'mat on His slaves. Particularly if we have wealth, a wealthy person, the ulama say the wealthy person should not walk around in rags to conceal his wealth. Because generally that would be because he doesn't want people to know that he's wealthy, so they don't come and bother him for his wealth. But rather, if Allah has given you a lot of wealth, so make it known, and people who are in need, you can give them. That's a great service that you can do. Of course, there's a long discussion on that issue as well, but in any case, that is a very sound hadith that Allah subhanahu wants to see. Again, wants to see His, He likes to see His ni'mat manifest with His servants. If Allah has given us something, then not only we make it manifest, وَمَا بِنِعْمَةِ رَبِّكَ فَحَدِّثْ. Talk about and praise Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the blessings that He's given you. Of course, if it becomes again riyah, and that's a fine line that we have to be cognizant of and be careful, because in the name of showing Allah's ni'mat or talking about Allah's ni'mat, it might be the underlying motivation is riyah. It could be, look at me, I'm something. Allah save us from all of that. Last thing we just wanted to mention, that there is higher and lower stratas of this riyah, of this ostentatiousness. So the worst would be the ostentatiousness or riyah in ibadat, and there's no maqsad whatsoever, or there's no objective whatsoever of ibadat. Someone will offer salat or pay zakat or go for hajj, and there's no real intention whatsoever of pleasing Allah or doing anything for Allah. And of course this is the hypocrisy of the worst category. And so this is obviously, an extremely dangerous situation. Allah save us all from that. Another would be is that next stage would be that generally we want to show people, but also, we would like to get something from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also. But we're, doing things basically for the people, and if we can get something from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that's also fine. This is also pretty far out of the ballpark, as it were. And then you would have a third situation where it's kind of 50-50. So this would kind of, balance out that. And so it ends up kind of, as they say, ma'alik wala laysa laka wala ma'alik. It's not for you, it's not against you. And then the last and the lightest, and still dangerous, would be that basically one does things for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but the fact that people are watching, and it kind of encourages him to be a bit more. For example, I'm making salat, somebody's watching, okay, make it a little bit longer, make the qiraat a little bit better, look like I'm doing a little more khushu'. So this is also, and the ulama say very interestingly that, so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has He knows exactly what we're doing, what percentage of what, and so to the extent that is for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, fabiha. Okay, accepted. But the extent that is other than Allah, that's good. So it will. So if there's more for the sake of Allah and less for then perhaps something might come out of that. So to the extent that it's for Allah, then it will be for Allah. But to the extent it's for others, then it will be for others, and it will affect and impact that. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us tawfiq and learn ikhlas, because actually ikhlas, if we have ikhlas, which is not an easy thing, it's the last station of the salikin, of the seekers of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's a very difficult thing to do. But the idea is to be on the path of acquisition. So let us pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He puts us on that path of struggling and striving for the acquisition of these noble characteristics. Save us from ourselves, our evil selves and shaitan in the environment, and accept whatever little we have to offer. Ameen thumma ameen wa akhir da'wana. Alhamdulillahi rabbil